So we're going to talk about a couple things, but since we have the wind coming off the bay, we'll see how everything shakes out here. The first thing we're going to talk about is this berm that we're standing on right now. So in the beginning of this year, so Delaware Bay has the highest concentration of horseshoe crabs anywhere in the known universe. And Reed's Beach, which is where we're standing, Reed's Beach, Cape May County, Middle Township, has a really good concentration of horseshoe crabs that come up, and subsequently has a real good population of red knots who visit each spring in May and June for the migration, or each May, really. At any rate, one of the problems that we have here in the Delaware Bay is a unnaturally low elevation of our marshes, which is due to historic land use practices. And I think Joe Smith may have touched on some of this morning. I didn't get the benefit of hearing his whole talk, but we have here in the Delaware Bay, we have a history of salt marsh farming. So they were cut down in Spartina, and just general land management decisions through the years has led to a lower than ideal marsh condition behind the bay beaches. And what we have been finding is in places, as the marsh is a little bit too low to back up the beach, we're losing the berms at the beach and subsequently creating little horseshoe crab traps at high tide. As the crabs come up the beach at high tide to spawn, the tide was just flowing back down into, I guess, the area you're looking at right now, that sort of whiter sand there. And these are pockmarked across the bay, but this one was particularly problematic. At high tide, the crabs would wash in here by the hundreds, maybe the thousands, depending on the night, and they can't get their way back out. Then most of the time they end up stuck in the marsh, and there's a lot of crab mortality associated with these dips, these overwash areas where there just has not been enough buildup on the marsh behind it to keep the beach in place. And so one of the things that we wanted to try to do was reduce one of our main goals. I'll go back at this step. One of the main goals with our habitat restoration here on the Delaware Bay is to increase horseshoe crab egg densities. And so we focus a lot on sand and grain sizes and beach slopes and things like that. And so we're bringing in the crabs here, and we're seeing this mortality. And our intention is to stop the crabs from dying, because the more crabs who are on the beach spawning, the more crabs we have in the sand. So we came in this the spring, just before the spawn starts in May, and we laid in several tons of, I think it was 6,000 tons of sand here to create an elevated berm at the top side of the beach. And so we did that, and then we came back with some volunteers on Earth Day, and we planted a whole bunch of beach grass. So we have several thousand plants that we put in with our volunteers on Earth Day. We are on Reed's Beach, in case I didn't make that entirely clear. We're on Reed's Beach in Middle Township, Cape May County. So we came in and we put in the berm, and then we planted it. So we've created a vegetated berm with the intention of keeping horseshoe crabs from washing into the marsh and ultimately dying from drying out back in the marsh. So we have had very good luck with this process. We've done this here. We also did it further down at Pearson's Point to several locations on that beach. And the initial results from this look incredible. And most years when we would look out back here into this overwash area, into this dip, we would see tons of dead horseshoe crabs, just dried out in the sun. Here you can see there's basically none. So this berm functioned exactly like we wanted it to. The hope is that with vegetating this berm, it'll persist into the future. We're waiting to see how well that's done, but so far we're about 6 months into this. And it's still holding up fairly well. There is a little bit of scarping at the front edge down here, but otherwise we are in really good shape with this berm, and we're really happy with how this turned out. These plants look great, they look happy, and we have high hopes for this project. So I think one of the things I do need to mention here is that this work is really vital to the preservation of the red knot and the development or further development of horseshoe crab populations here in the Delaware Bay. And it's only possible because we have funders like National Fish and Wildlife Foundation who put a lot of the funds into this to let us do this work. They let us give us the freedom to experiment a little bit, based on our experience and what we think are going to be the best approaches. And that has been really wonderful. We've also really benefited a lot from our partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and their partners program and their coastal program. They are key allies of ours in all of these projects. And so we get the benefit of their technical expertise when we're talking about these projects and we're thinking about the impacts on protected species and such. But we also get some of their physical labor. So we have a lot of the Fish and Wildlife folks who come out and join us on our projects and put in some of that sweat equity into these projects they've helped us develop. So that's always wonderful. But so far, this project has been wildly successful for us. It did exactly what we wanted through the spawning season, kept crabs from dying in the back marsh, and we're very, very pleased with it. So I'm going to start moving on unless there's questions. So there's questions. So we'll do this. Is it a type question? Okay.
If there's any evidence showing how this burn may respond to storms and storm associated.
Well, this is again, this is fairly new, a fairly new project. It's been for about 6 months. We've had a few storms roll through, and it has held up very well. The elevation is still there. The vegetation still looks really good, with the exception of this minor scarping at the front edge. I would say this has held up very, very well to storm surges and weather. Ideally, this would also help prevent some flooding into the back marsh in some places that we need it. I suspect you could use this technique to almost create almost a level lip situation across the bay front if you needed to. You have a place where there's a lot of water flowing through a particular area to build up the berm, put in some vegetation. Our real hope is that with the addition of the vegetated berm, it'll really lock the root system. Once it's well established, will lock this in and be very resistant to erosion in the future. Like I said, this is fairly new of a project, so the full results are a little unknown. But so far, 6-7 months in, we're very happy with the results, and I suspect it could be a good solution for particular areas. But again, with habitat restoration and living shoreline stuff and building with nature, you have, it's always site specific, so you have to evaluate what you're looking at and what possible solutions you have. But this has worked out really well for us. And the goal for this was to keep horseshoe crabs from getting stuck in the back marsh. So to that end, it worked really well.
All right, follow-up question. Are
Yep.
there any plans to address the low marsh behind me?
Yeah, so there's no plans for these marshes particularly right now, at least none that we're developing. We have been working on some projects elsewhere on the bay with some thin layer application or beneficial reuse projects. We actually have a section of marsh, a little over an acre north of here in Cumberland County, Thompson's Beach, and we took essentially what was a mud flat and raised that up to a low marsh platform, and that was done with a coir log containment. And then the creeks adjacent to the marsh were dredged and pumped into that containment. They dewatered on site. And that has proved very successful. And it's something that we'd like to continue exploring. But there's a lot of other interest in doing marsh restoration along the bay. And most of that would ideally be done with beneficial reuse if possible. But again, it's a site-by-site scenario, and dredging beneficial reuse projects are not generally really cheap. So finding the funding for that could be difficult. Although this is Fish and Wildlife property back behind us, this marsh back here. So they may be developing some projects to look at marsh elevation. There's a lot of interest on the part of U.S. Fish and Wildlife to benefit marsh birds specifically. So they might be looking at their properties where they could do that, where they could get maybe some micro habitat elevations put in place or something along those lines. But we don't currently have we don't have the funding. I mean, we got lots of plans, I guess, but we don't have the funding to raise the marshes everywhere that needs to be done right now. It's an approach that we'd like to take in the future, is having something a little more programmatic. But at this point, we don't have funds to build up any marsh here.
Next question is, what type of grass is it, and are you seeing any natural propagation or colonization?
Yeah, so this is American beach grass, and all we did is plant it. We got plugs from a local nursery, and we planted it kind of on that 1 foot center. Although, I think it works a little better when it's a little clumpier. But so far, this worked out well for us. It's holding up nice. We are not doing anything else propagating it other than planting the plugs that we've got from the nursery. I will say that we have also had a really nice relationship with USDA and their agricultural extension folks, providing some beach grass for our projects as well. So I think some of the plugs that went down in Pierce's Point came from their office. So that was really very nice. So, all right. So that is, unless there's more questions, Richie, are we good? All right. So that's the berm. Super project. I'm sorry you guys couldn't be here to see it in person. It's a lovely day, although it's gotten a bit windy. So I think what we're going to do is, Rob, I believe we're going to go to Nortec so they can talk. No, we're not doing that. We are going to show a little video, Rob. That's what we're going to do. So the intention, before you do that, Rob, let me just say that the plan for this virtual field trip is to go look at our Intertidal Reef, which is just down the way here. But since the wind's coming across the bay, the tide's not pushing out quite like we had hoped. So we're going to walk that way and see what we can see. But as I'm walking, instead of you watching me huff my way down this beach, Rob's got a short 3-minute video that shows the construction of this multi-reef. It's a low-profile shellback reefs. We built 3 of them here at Cook's Beach, and he's going to show you a quick, here's how it's building the reefs video. So Rob, you can roll that video now, and I'm going to walk this way. So it was some drone footage we had shot during the building of the reefs that they just turned into a nice little video for us. But so that gives you a little bit of an idea of the intertidal reefs we're building out there on Cook. So the grand plan, had the tide worked with me, was to walk across the creek that's over here to my right and get onto the beach and walk out and show you these awesome intertidal reefs that are out there. But you know, it doesn't work out in the field sometimes. So what we are going to talk about a little bit is some of the effects of the beach restoration work that we've been doing out here. So, but right behind me, you can start to see the shoals that are opening up as the tide is pulling back a little bit. You can see a little bit of shoaling. None of this was here before we started doing our work. It was, I got to put my hood up. Oh, here. Hold on. Is that any better? Did I get rid of the wind noise? Am I good? All right. All right. So we're starting to see these shoals develop. Well, they have developed over a number of years, but none of these shoals were really here, or at least not as robustly as they are now. And this is the result of ongoing beach restoration. So Cook's Beach, which is just down the way here, has had 4 or 5 series of sand put on it. We've been working with Stockton University's Coastal Research Center, try to get those words confused a little bit, on a littoral environment, a program to keep track of where sand shifts. And so it's a program called DB Stat, and we're essentially trying to track where sand moves in the bay. And so one of the things that they've discovered is that Cook's Beach acts a lot like a feeder beach to the north and the south. So the more we put sand there, the more it goes into the other beaches we want. But one of the side benefits of that has been the development of these awesome shoals. And so again, you can start seeing, we'll keep walking the chair here, but you can start seeing these develop, and as the tide pulls out more, they'll be even bigger. But the shoals have proved to be a wonderful breeding ground or spawning area for horseshoe crabs. And in turn, they're really great for the red knots to forage on. So they have, you know, they can move in along that shoal as the tide comes in. Oh, all right, I'm going to do the hood, guys. I'm sorry if that. All right, is that any better? Did we make that work? Okay, all right. Lucia is on the camera for me. She's trying to give me the signals, so I apologize. But again, these shoals have been developed over the last 6 years of us doing continuous beach restoration along these, essentially what we call these 5 beach, the 5 beach area on the Delaware Bay. And so it's Reeds and Cooks, Kimball's, Bay Cove, Pierce's Point. They're sort of the hot spot for shorebird activity in the spring. So the red knots are hitting this area hard when they're here to forage. The horseshoe crabs are spawning in really good numbers here. So for us to continue doing work in this section is very beneficial to, again, benefit horseshoe crabs and develop horseshoe crab egg densities, as well as benefit the foraging of migratory red knots and other shorebirds. And so at any rate, so over time, we've started to get these shoals to develop, and actually in that, and I think in that area you could kind of see the shoals as the tide was out a little bit more. But it kind of goes on both ends of Cook's Beach and is really a dramatic feature at low tide. It's really neat. But the reason we were coming here initially was to talk about the intertidal reefs. So we built a series of low-profile shell bag reefs, and when I say low profile, they're 3 feet in elevation. What we build are a series of reefs. I guess you saw the video. There are 5 by 10 blocks of shell bags that are stacked to about 3 feet in elevation, sort of trapezoidal in shape, and then we just tie them down in place. One of the things that, so one of the results of that, and you can start to see those reefs are just out where those white caps are, kind of starting to form off the Cook's Beach over there. And that's a result of sort of the buildup of sand out around our reefs and the reefs themselves. So these low profile reefs have shown to be really pretty good for us at the lower tide, low, maybe mid tide range, where we can kind of knock off some of the erosion at the toe of the slope on the beach. And that has proved beneficial. But to get more storm protection and a little more robust protection for the beach in general, we have been looking at building larger rock structures as a response to sort of the continued beating down of the bay. But in fact, tomorrow, I believe Dr. Larry Niles will be talking about that a little bit in one of his presentations. It's sort of our response of trying to take the engineered approach, but have the nature-based piece to it, nature-based component, so that we'll have these rock breakwaters with oyster reefs on the lee side, and then follow it up with some living shoreline techniques up inland from the breakwaters. So that's something that's developing, and we have a lot of hope for in some of the higher energy areas. So we have some beaches that are just constantly pummeled. They sort of have this direct line of sight to the ocean almost, right? So from the opening of the Delaware Bay, there's a straight line that runs straight up the bay into some of these more northern and Cumberland County bay beaches that take a lot of wave action. So we're looking at more aggressive structures built out of rock for that. But yeah, so this is the Reefs Beach. So we have talked about the shoaling, which is wonderful, and the intertidal reefs. The problem that we have with those is over time, well, we have a lot of problems with them, I guess, but over time they start to flatten out. It's hard to keep them in that trapezoidal shape. So we built them to 3 feet, and very quickly they start to flatten out a little bit. And we've kind of realized to get them to a higher elevation that's a little more stable, we have to widen the bases, which at that point, we're just using thousands and thousands of shell bags, which have the drawback of being plastic net bags. And we generally hate that. The unfortunate thing is it's the material that works best for that kind of application. But we have been looking at some alternatives. So another thing, we're looking for low profile reefs. There's more of a gabion structure with some shell facings on those. And that's something we're evaluating as well. But so that's what we have going on. As it turns out, all the restoration work that we've been doing, we'll keep walking a little bit, Lucia, so we'll get everybody a change of scenery here. Just as a side note, guys, since we're walking towards the creek now, my intention was to walk right through here, and I might be able to up on the shoal, but I'm not entirely sure, and I don't know that I want to be on camera as I fall into the ocean. So, right. Yeah, as opposed to what? Yeah, so well, initially the shell bags just kind of what you did, right? You use shell bags in living shoreline projects, and you know, the shells are very available. The material is cost effective, and it works great. I mean, it really holds up well for the most part. It's durable. Volunteers can handle it, and it just seemed like a good solution. And it is a good solution, but it has its drawbacks. One of the things with the gabions that's something we're looking at now. I know that TNC, especially down in Louisiana, has been doing some work with those historically. They're a little indifferent to the success of them. They've held up, but the problem with these gabions is they'll start to rust and break down over time. And so that's something we're looking at and we're concerned with. So we're going to do some test installations of those, trying to see how they hold up over time, see what they look like. As hopefully we get some oyster set on them and they start to develop, will that structure end up holding together even if the metal rusts away? And that's stuff we don't know about. But when we first started building the shell bag reefs, that was just sort of the technique that was most widely used, and that's what we were trying to go with. So well, yeah, I got to tell you, as I was really hoping that this tide would be out for you. But so at any rate, the series of reefs are just out there, and they have proven to be pretty good. I think the one thing that's best, I guess I'm going to say about shell bag reefs, since we were asking why this and not that, the gabions, you got to use contractors to install. Shell bag reefs, you use volunteers. So for this, you saw that video, we brought out essentially the whole community showed up. You get 100 people that come down to a beach, and they put that sweat equity into rebuilding their beach and trying to maintain it. And you know, you build some stewardship and you build awareness, and you get to talk about horseshoe crabs, and you get to talk about the birds. And then when some legislator decides he doesn't think the moratorium we have in place anymore is worth having in place, we can tell people, hey, call your congressman and tell him it's ridiculous to get rid of our moratorium on horseshoe crab collection. So there's a lot of benefits to doing a shell bag reef, basically beyond the cost effectiveness and the durability of them. It's really that community engagement piece, which is the best part about them, I guess. So how do we do, Lucia? We have more questions, or? Okay.
So the question was on oyster castles.
Yeah.
Have you ever considered the use of them, and do you have strong natural recruitment of oysters in this location?
Yeah, so oyster castles, yes, we have thought about using them. One of the reasons we haven't really embraced oyster castles for our organization. There are other organizations that have used them. TNC and U.S. Fish and Wildlife did a few projects with them north of here, and I think they had some decent success with that. For us, oyster castles seem a little too rip-rappy, and that's something that we're trying to avoid. There's a long history on the Delaware Bay of people just using broken up concrete as the stabilizer for the beach, and that has led to a lot of impingement problems along the Delaware Bay for horseshoe crabs as they come into spawn. And so for us, just that sort of cinder block look, it's almost just aesthetics for us. It harkens back too much to that, and I think we've just avoided it for that reason. I think there's probably some good concrete structures out there. There's a company that makes some concrete coated burlap stuff, and I'm sorry, I can't remember their name right now. That looks pretty interesting for some breakwaters. We've tried some branch box stuff up in Barnegat Bay, so there's a lot of different things we could try. So the second part of that question, so I think did that seem, Lucia, did I answer that appropriately? I know I got to answer oyster recruitment. Yeah. Okay, so the answer on oyster recruitment is yes, we have fantastic oyster recruitment on our structure. And, within months, we'll see nice sized oysters on branch reefs. And that's really awesome. There's a really good natural set here in the Delaware Bay. The problem that we've had is they only live for about 2 years and then they end up dying. And there's some thoughts on that. Right now, I think the main dying off is because they are intertidal, and we have these hard freezes on them that's killing them off. So we're not super sure on why they die off, but the nice thing about oysters is they continue to build upon themselves. So we'll continue to get more set, but that we haven't gotten the build up as great as we want. Now we do have some oyster reefs down here on Reed's Beach, which are very low now. Well, they seem low now because the sediment is built up. But there's parts of those reefs that if I didn't tell you I built it, you wouldn't know that it was a reef that we built. And we have a lot of recruitment, and we have a lot of things living on it, and they have persisted. So it's sort of hit or miss, but generally we get good natural recruitment. How long it persists is sort of something we're working on sorting out. Now we do. We got more questions?
Somebody asked about the Shorelines and said that they used them in Texas and didn't have a great experience.
Oh, really? Yeah, I don't know what project they would have done out in Texas for them. I imagine Marsh, or maybe they did a living shoreline. Ours, the core logs we used, we had a series of logs, 24-inch diameter, 12-inch diameter, and 6-inch diameter, and we created a containment that went from a dike out into like a horseshoe shape for about an acre, and we built up with the 2-foot core logs. And then we stacked and we got to the elevation we needed to create sort of that level lip scenario. So as you fill it with the dredge sediment, it runs off evenly as it dewaters, which is what we were trying to do. That was we did a pretty good job at that, but there were some low spots, but by and large, that worked out great. As far as the longevity of the core, we found them to be very durable installing them. Like we beat them up pretty good as we drug them out to the marsh. We had, to get started, we actually floated some out on boats and then sank them in place. That was an interesting use of them, but they have held up. So that project was, I'm going to say 3 years ago, and I just had some interns over the summer walking along the perimeter, and everything was holding up really well. They're still in place. I mean, they're coated in mud, which is expected, but they're still retaining the soil, the sediment, and they're still in place. So they're still performing their function. Not projects that we've done, but other projects. I think Partnership for the Delaware Estuary has done. They did some stuff with core logs up in Money Island with some bank stabilization and some shoreline stabilization. And from what I can tell, they had really good luck with that as well. So I think if they stay wet, I think that might be better for them. When they dry out, I think they might start falling apart. But I think the key is maybe to keep them saturated all the time. But I'm not entirely sure.
I think everything else you answered in your speaking, but what is fetch?
what is fetch? It's how far the water is coming before it gets to you, right? So the wind and the waves are driving water a certain distance, and then it gets to your beach, and that's the fetch. So so if beaches at Fortescue, for example, have like this infinite fetch. They have a fetch that'll go straight out into the ocean and essentially has no end. But we have the fetch. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. What is the fetch on this beach? I guess it kind of depends on which way we're looking, right? So on this beach here, we're looking out into the Delaware Bay. I'm going to stand with my back to the camera just so I can do this. But New Jersey goes up this way and that way. Delaware is over that way. And so we have from here maybe about 10 miles to Delaware. And from parts of Cumberland County, maybe 2 miles. So it kind of depends which way the wind and stuff is blowing, but that's the fetch on this particular beach. There we do. All right. More questions?
So have you tried core matting on the Upland beach and Marsh areas?
No, we have not. We had used some core matting underneath as an underlayment on the core logs we installed at Thompson's Beach, but we haven't used any core matting out on any of our beach restoration or I don't know that we really have any need for that. We don't see a whole lot of, well, I mean, there's definitely erosion. No, the answer, I guess the simple answer is no, we haven't used that other than as an underlayment for core logs, which just as a side note, if you're putting core logs in a marsh, that using that as a stake down underlayment is not a bad plan. Yeah.
And then just one question about the oyster bags. Have they moved around since the install and are they secured?
Yeah. So we secure them we drive rebar pins into the ends, the 4 corners of the reefs. And so we'll have a reef block. I'm going to draw a picture in the sand for everybody. So we'll have a pin here, a pin there, and there. And we'll do some series of tie down where we crisscross. Sometimes we'll do a straight across line or all of them at the same time. They're built up in this sort of trapezoid shape, right? And they'll be bag, 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 bag. And as we go up, essentially trying to get to where we have one top, which is sort of acting as a keystone to hold everything down. So that's how we tie it down. What was the rest of that question? Oh yeah, they move all over the place. That's part of the problem. Interestingly, so we use whelk shell in our restoration and our shell bags because whelk is fished out of the Delaware Bay and there's not a real good secondary use for it. So we use whelk shells, and those are, the big conch shells, if you're not familiar with whelk. But they're super durable and they're great, but there's knobbed whelk and then there's channeled whelk, and the channeled whelk are a lot more delicate and sort of sometimes we'll have bags that are full of just channel whelk and they almost float, which is crazy. So we have to manage that. But the knobbed whelk bags don't go far. They can get pushed off the reef and tumbled a bit, but they usually don't go too terribly far from the reef. In an ideal situation for a reef installation, we'll go back out periodically after we've built it, retighten ropes and restack where needed. We did that very well here at Reed's Beach, and that held up great, and we've had great success with it. With the COVID and whatnot, we had less success with being able to revisit this project at Cook's Beach. So I suspect that's flattened out a little bit more than what would be ideal for us. We would have liked to come in and put some of those bags on there, but it's still providing the service for us at low and mid tide. So, yeah, is that the question?
One more question.
One more. Oh, good. I love questions. We can keep asking them. I'm here all day.
Somebody noticed there are no navigational markers. Are they required for projects?
Yeah. So so normally we have diamond markers out there. We have PVC poles with reflective tape diamond markers at either end of the reefs. They were out there, but I think they've got knocked down. We generally put them out during the summer time frame and pull them in the winter. But it looks like they were knocked down for us already. But they're not very high, and this isn't like a highly. There aren't a whole lot of boats coming in. They're inshore. They're essentially 200 feet from there. So we don't have a whole lot of people riding through with wave runners or anything, which is a plus, but we do mark them, but it's a PVC pole in the bay, and sometimes they don't hold up great. We have the largest structures we're talking about doing further north here, the mouth of the Morris River, which is a huge project we're involved with, and really excited about, is going to have, we'll have pilings and, a little more robust markings for those, because those would be a navigational hazard to some degree. So, but these, we try to keep them marked. And in fact, we've been talking with the U.S. Coast Guard for the last couple of months, off and on, about what the best way to mark the stuff is for the long term. There's a whole lot of questions about these for the long term, but we don't have time really to get into that, I think. But if you ever meet me, or if you want to chat about it later, you can certainly email me. But just the long-term ownership issues and things like that here in New Jersey, might be New Jersey specific, I don't know. But so there's a lot of long-term stuff that we still have to sort out, I think, really, before this is, but there's just things that are open-ended. We don't have full answers for yet, but we pay Tideland's license fees on these reefs, right? And I don't know at what point do they stop being something we installed and something that's just part of the environment, right? So that's a question we have to try to get answered at some point in the future. For now, we'll just pay the licensing fees, and we'll keep going until we can get a full and firm answer on that kind of stuff. But those are the kind of things you got to think about long term. Oh yeah. Oh man, this whole place is crazy. Shorebird Surveys. Again, the shorebird. This is like, these 5 beaches are most heavily used by the shorebirds. I think last year 90% of the foraging red knots on the bay were on these beaches. Or 2 years ago, really, probably, I think, 2 years ago. But this year was a bad year for red knots, because the previous year was not great for red knots either. But yes, we have. Again, hold on. I'm back. Okay. One of the things we do is close off all these beaches during May when the birds are here to forage. We don't allow, I say it like I'm the boss around here, but we try to restrict access to some degree to keep people from interrupting the foraging of the migratory birds. And honestly, I think that's the best thing we can do for these birds, is to keep some folks off the beach for a short period of time when the birds. All right, I don't know. Any better? Okay. All right. Sorry about that, guys. So one of the things we do here on the bay and the Jersey Bay is we try to limit access during the day when the birds are feeding, and that has been wonderfully successful for the birds. But the Delaware Bay Shorebird Survey people are here all the time. Dr. Larry Nias, who hopefully you guys will see speaking tomorrow, is renowned, a world-renowned scientist in this whole birds tagging and counting and surveying piece, and him and his team of scientists come down and tag the birds every year. So there's a whole lot of monitoring done here on the beaches. We also do monitoring for horseshoe crab egg densities, horseshoe crab use. We look at morphology over time, right? So we constantly have surveys done of these areas from Stockton University's Coastal Research Center. So that's, there's tons of monitoring we do down here fairly consistently and often seasonally for.
Okay, I think that's all the questions.
Oh, awesome. Are we good? Okay, I think that's going to conclude our presentation. Unless there's any last minute questions, I think I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll say thank you to Ray for giving me the chance to do this for you guys. Thank you to all of you for participating, and thank you to Lucia and Richard here who's been helping me on the beach. So thank you very much. Take care, guys.